It was a crisp autumn morning on the island of Sodor, and Edwin the rail motor was approaching Ballyhoo on one of his regular runs. As he stopped at the station, he looked curiously down the line. Normally, Evan would have been meeting him. However, the other rail motor had gone to the works that morning for his 5-yearly service, and another engine would be taking his place. Much to Edwin's surprise, it was James who arrived with the other train, the red engine smoothly pulling into the platform. He looked slightly annoyed.
Morning, Edwin.
Morning, James. Are you filling in for Evan?
Yes. What do you think I'm doing here?
But it's usually Sheffield. Aren't you needed on the main line?
Sheffield's needed elsewhere. As for my trains on the main line, Gordon's covering them.
Oh, really?
Now that he's retired from the Express, he doesn't mind taking trucks so much. Apparently he doesn't have to worry about maintaining his image now.
James glanced down the line.
The Fat Controller said I was the only engine available. Kept reminding me that change is as good as a rest.
Before Edwin could reply, his guard blew his whistle and the rail motor departed. A few minutes later, it was James's turn to depart. He smoothly pulled out of the station. Despite his annoyance at being stuck on a branch line, he couldn't help feeling a little bit curious. It had been a few decades since he'd last been down this way, after all, and he was curious about how it had changed. For the rest of the morning, James took Evan's passenger trains along the Norramby Branch. He met Hubert the hovercraft at Norramby, and took tourists and visitors along the surf line to South Norramby. He was enjoying himself, looking after the coaches and passengers. Later that afternoon, James was resting in the sheds at Vickerstown. He wasn't due to take another train for a little while, so he was surprised when the station master strode up to him. "James, I'm afraid Owen's been delayed coming back from Barrow. We need you to take his next train."
Coaches or trucks?
"Trucks. Henry's due to bring them up on his slow goods."
Trucks? But can't they wait? I mean, it's only a goods run.
"I'm afraid not, James. Some of them have urgent shipments, frozen groceries, that sort of thing. Owen will take your next passenger train." With that, the station master turned and strode away.
I was told I'd just be taking passenger trains this week.
"It's not his fault Owen got delayed, James. A really useful engine does what's needed, remember?"
Yes.
Still grumbling, James moved off. A little while later, James reached the Norramby transport hub with his trucks. It hadn't been a smooth run down from Vickerstown. He'd made no secret of his annoyance when he'd picked up the trucks, and they'd taken the chance to have a bit of fun at his expense.
James? What happened to Owen?
Edwin asked as he arrived.
Some sort of delay at Barrow,
James said grumpily.
"What's the matter, James? Don't want to get your paint dirty?"
Shut up. They've been like that the whole way down. You're lucky you don't have to deal with them,
James said. He fell silent a moment later to concentrate on his shunting. James finished a few minutes later and waited on the siding, leaving the line clear for Edwin. The guard's whistle sounded out and Edwin departed. As a passenger train, he had priority over James's slow goods.
I'd rather not have that luck,
Edwin said sadly to himself once he was past James. While all this had been going on, Owen had been making good time with his passenger train. He reached Ballyhoo right on schedule and smoothly stopped at the station. Once his passengers had disembarked and boarded, the guard raised his green flag. A frantic horn sounded out.
"Owen, wait!"
Owen looked over to see Bertie hurrying up the driveway. He screeched to a halt next to the station, and his passengers jumped out.
"Bertie? I didn't know you were running tours round here."
It's a history tour for some children from Norramby High School.
"From Norramby High School? Is the road to Norramby closed?"
Ugh, not really. Just congested with traffic.
"Really?
You've met that hovercraft bringing cars over from the mainland, haven't you?
Hubert? Yes, he seems a decent fellow."
Well, it seems most of his passengers aren't just going to Norramby. Traffic all the way to Vickerstown has been quite heavy lately, in both directions.
"So the school children took the train here?"
Yes, their teachers thought it would reduce the chance of being caught in traffic. Even so, we did get in a bit of a jam. That's why I nearly missed you.
It sounds unpleasant. Wish I could help you.
Thanks.
A few moments later, the school children had finished boarding the train. The guard blew his whistle, and Owen departed. As he did so, he considered Bertie's predicament. It wasn't just the bus that was affected, he thought. Surely that congestion would be causing problems for the people of Norramby and Ballyhoo as well. Later that evening, Owen and Edwin were resting in the sheds when James returned. I'm afraid to say, the red engine was still in a bit of a foul mood.
Evening, James.
Evening, Owen.
Are you alright, James? You seem a little put out.
Being stuck on a branch line is bad enough. I thought I'd at least have a break from trucks this week. I mean, I'm filling in for a passenger rail car.
James, I do appreciate you looking after the train, and I know the shopkeepers and restaurateurs in Ballyhoo and Norramby do too.
Well, I suppose there is that.
James, do you realise what you're complaining about?
Yes, having to pull...
You're complaining about being able to pull anything, James. Anything! Passengers, trucks, you name it. How do you think I feel sitting here listening to you complain about this, and all I can do is shuttle up and down the line with passengers?
Edwin, calm down!
Edwin blinked, as if suddenly realising what he was doing.
Oh, it just gets to me, you know. Anyway, I think I have an evening train to take.
He quickly departed, before either of the other two engines could reply.
I had no idea.
Neither did I.
Owen trailed off, looking thoughtfully at the diesel rail car heading towards the station platform. James looked curiously at Owen.
Penny for your thoughts, Owen?
Evan and Edwin. There's always been something about them I couldn't quite put my buffer on. Even after all these years of keeping the peace between them.
But you've known them for years.
You've known Gordon for decades, but you were still surprised when he offered to look after your trucks.
I take your point.
Silence fell after that, and James soon drifted off to sleep. But Owen didn't. His mind was still going over this new revelation about the railcar twins. A couple of hours later, Edwin returned from his evening run. Owen looked over as the diesel railcar backed into the shed.
Edwin, about earlier...
I'm sorry, I shouldn't have ranted like that.
It's alright, Edwin. But may I ask, have you always felt like that?
Edwin paused for a moment, considering the question.
I think, in one way or another, yes.
Would I be right in guessing Evan feels the same way?
I might as well tell you everything. He's more jealous of you than I am.
Jealous? Of me?
Well, just locomotives in general. We agreed not to say anything though. We didn't want to risk your friendship.
Owen smiled for a moment, touched.
So, what happened tonight?
I guess Gordon is a passenger engine too, isn't he? One of the great LNER Pacifics.
Yes, I understand he was the first of them.
Yet now even he is taking care of goods trains. It just sort of felt like the last straw.
You should have said something sooner.
Why? We're stuck on passengers because of our nature. We're essentially motorised coaches. We've even got different couplings. Those could be changed, yes, but what goods traffic would we carry?
It was a good question, Owen had to admit, but he couldn't think of a good answer. Early the next morning, Owen was taking his regularly scheduled goods run down to Tidmouth. He always enjoyed these morning runs. There weren't many other trains around, and the long runs gave him time to think. This particular morning, he had a lot to think about. He was still considering his conversation with Edwin last night. If Evan and Edwin were to take trucks, it would have to be goods traffic that fit in with their passenger services. Owen knew the delivery schedules required for most of the businesses along the Norramby Branch, and they didn't line up with the passenger runs at all. Maybe they could take some sort of luggage van, he thought. After all, he'd seen Bertie with a luggage trailer on 1 or 2 occasions.
Hold on a second!
Owen said to himself as a thought struck him. He remembered Bertie's hurried arrival at Ballyhoo yesterday, and his comments about the traffic from Norramby. Then there was another conversation, one which Owen had had with Evan and Hubert a few months ago.
We literally don't carry the same traffic as Hubert.
What was that, Owen?
Oh, I just had an idea, driver.
Owen replied, and he smiled as his plan began to take shape. It would solve a few problems and be quite simple to implement. He finished his journey in the Tidmouth yard.
Morning, Owen. How are things going up Norramby way?
Oh, same as usual. James is doing a good job of filling in for Evan. Have you seen the fat controller around at all?
Not this morning. Do you need to talk to her?
Yes. Could you let her know?
Aye, I'll tell her if I see her.
Thanks.
With that, Owen headed off to collect the trucks he was due to take back to Norramby. Later that afternoon, the Fat Controller came to see Owen at Vickerstown. The diesel engine outlined his idea, and the Fat Controller liked the sound of it. She agreed to implement it. A couple of evenings later, Owen and Edwin were resting in the sheds when James arrived from his last train. Things had been slightly awkward between the three engines ever since Edwin's outburst.
So, you two had a busy day as well?
You could say that.
Silence fell for a moment, then a diesel horn sounded out. All three engines looked up to see a familiar shape backing down into the shed.
Evening all.
Evening, Evan. Welcome back.
Evan, what's happened to your couplers?
Instead of the coupler he'd been built with, Evan's front buffer beam now bore a standard hook and link coupler.
It's for the new car carrying service, Edwin. We actually get to pull car transporter trucks behind us.
Edwin gasped.
Really? Oh yes. Owen suggested it to the Fat Controller.
Edwin looked over at Owen, slightly surprised.
Well, what you said got me thinking.
Edwin grinned.
Thank you, Owen.
As Evan and Edwin began catching up, James looked over at Owen. The red engine was quite baffled.
They're actually happy about taking trucks.
It's something they've never had a chance to do before, James. If you were in their position, how would you react?
Well, I suppose you have a point.
James replied, but he still couldn't help thinking that seemed a bit strange. The next day, Edwin left for his service and rebuild, with James covering his trains. The red engine couldn't help noticing that Evan seemed a lot more cheerful than he'd been in the past, and even Owen admitted that he'd never seen the diesel rail car in a better mood. Before long, motor rail ramps were built at both Norramby and Vickerstown stations. Edwin and Evan enjoyed their new roles as transporters of both passengers and their vehicles. They even ended up taking a truck or two when Owen was busy, although the size of their engines meant they couldn't take heavier loads than this. James, who had returned to his duties on the main line, observed all this with bemusement. It still didn't make any sense to him at all, but, he thought, it did seem to make the rail motor twins happy. He couldn't argue with that.